2 years ago today, I was going through a really tough time. I was pretty depressed and have moved home with my kids and lost my job. Due to this, I didn't have the money to really do anything with my children during the summer holidays that year. Mid-July. I don't remember the exact date. Me and my kid's dad and his dog and my two sons, who were 7 and 4 at the time, decided to go for a picnic at the castle ruins near our home. We lived in a small town in the northeast of England called Seaham, and the castle ruins are known as both the Dalton Tower and Daldon Tower. There is info about it online, but unfortunately not too much. We got to the ruins and set up our picnic. We played some games and etc. We didn't see any other people around the whole day, which really isn't a surprise. It's quite difficult to get to the tower, is also out the way of the rest of the town. And to be honest, I don't think most people while we were there. I took a lot of photos, some of the kids and some of the surrounding areas. I was taking the pictures when I noticed a small deer track through the small woods behind the tower. It led to an overgrown field. There was long grass and a few trees and nothing else. Rumbo, my ex's dog, had followed me, so I threw a stick a few times, but started to feel incredibly uncomfortable. Not so much fear, but just like a feeling like I shouldn't be there. So I took my phone out, snapped a quick picture, called for Rumbo, and walked back down a little trail to where my family was, and we continued on with our day. We had a great day, as it goes, although the uncomfortable feeling stayed with me until we left. When we arrived, I had quickly glanced through all the pictures I'd taken that day and uploaded them to Facebook within minutes. I got the usual likes and comments until there was a comment on the overgrown field picture. The comment was from my aunt and said, "Who was that pic taken? Who was that in the grass?" I had no idea what she was talking about, so I opened up the picture, and just as she said, there was a figure in the picture. I couldn't make any details as they were kind of far away, but looked completely solid. They had a dark top, which was tied together around their face, and is unusual considered how hot that day was. But their face was gray, his eyes were just two black holes, and it had a creepy smile. It also wasn't looking directly at me, it was looking through the trees towards where my sons were playing. In the early 80s, when I was 9, my family was visiting my uncle, who lived in the backwoods of Missouri. He lived on a lot of land, and the only other people who really lived on the street were relatives, so no one else ever just happened to be out there. This meant that no one ever locked their doors because random family members were always coming by for this and that. One night while I was there, my parents and aunt and uncle decided to go to a nearby town to go bowling, because bowling. My brothers, who were 11 and 12, my female cousins, 6 and 14, and I, female, stayed home. It was still daylight when the adults left, but it started raining pretty hard and got pretty dark. We used to play this game that was essentially hide and seek in the dark house, but we cleverly called it Vampire. There was a thin little mattress on the living room floor that some of the kids would sleep on at night. So the person who is it would lie on the mattress and fold themselves into a coffin and count down to midnight. When they got to midnight, they were looking for you. Again, all the lights are off, and you tried to make it back to the coffin before you got caught. Because the house was in the country. It was pitch black at night. We couldn't see the hand in front of your face. What this was meant for was the game is won. You couldn't tell where the vampire was looking. So, you just had to make a break for it. And 2, if you were extremely lazy, and I'm sure by now you can guess which one of us met the standards, you could hide in the living room with the coffin and get to the base quickly. Then, my 11-year-old brother was it and was doing the normal countdown. I was hiding maybe 6 feet from him. As he's counting, there's a flash of lightning. I don't know if it was already looking at the living room window, or if the lightning made me look. But the backlight of the lightning, I see a man with his face against the window. He had his hands on each side of his face like he was trying to peer in and looked exactly like the stereotypical creepster, heavy-set, scraggly beard, etc. I could feel every hair on my body standing on end. Immediately, I began trying to convince myself that I didn't see what I saw. But then Ben sternly whispered, "If anyone is hiding here, stay still." I sort of croaked out in, "I'm here." Right as there was another flash of lightning, Creepster was still there, but was no longer trying to look in the window. Instead, he was looking towards the front door. Ben and I immediately knew what was coming next. From where he was standing, Creepster was only about 5 feet from the front door. Ben was the same distance, but there was a couch between him and the door. Ben leapt over the couch and looked to the door as the creep started trying to handle. At this point, I guess Ben decided it was best to let the creeper know that people were home and to know that he was there, because he flipped on the porch light and then started turning on the lights in the house. This is going to sound weird, but I was too terrified to panic. Having said that, I was relying completely on Ben to know and to tell me what to do. He told me to go lock the other doors and was yelling for everyone else to come out and lock all of the windows. Honestly, the next few minutes are crazy in my mind. I remember everything up until this point extremely clearly. Then, I remember the end very clearly, but I'm less clear about the middle. I know that I locked the side door and then the sliding glass door at the back of the house. When we've talked about it over the years, some people remember us seeing him out in the back door as well. I don't think I remember that. What I clearly recall is locking the sliding glass door and standing there frozen and hearing Ben, in a very calm but firm voice, say, "Close the curtain. Listen to me, okay? Close the curtain." So I did. Ben can't remember that part. I just remember my fear and Ben's voice. So I'm not sure if I saw the creepster in the backyard or not. We tried to call the police, but my aunt and uncle had a stupid party line in. It didn't work. Whether from a storm or from a neighbor leaving it off the hook or whatever. For the record, they are the only people I've ever known with a party line, so this wasn't normal to me either. But for those of you who don't know what this is, and really rural areas, multiple people in the street would actually share a phone line. If you didn't have different rings for different households, but you could pick up the phone and listen to your neighbor's conversation. We also tried to summon and help my uncle's CB radio, but we just couldn't reach anyone. My uncle was a hunter, so he had a gun rack full of rifles in his home. My older cousin was out on town hunting trip and took them with him. All we could find was a BB gun that looked like a real rifle. I vividly remember Ben putting me on the phone duty and Scott, my older brother, on CB duty while he still watched, with the little square window on the front door with the BB gun. Maybe 30 minutes later, Ben said, "He's back. He's coming up the driveway." The rest of us froze in fear, but Ben opened the door and stepped out on the porch, pointing the gun at him. "Get out of here right now." Then, as we hear our cousin Kyle, he lived down the road a bit, say, "You know it's a BB gun, right?" Even though Kyle was only 15, I remember that we felt like we have been saved when he showed up. Kyle seems really skeptical of our story, like we were playing a trick auto, even though we had no idea what was coming. But he stayed with us until our parents came home. Between 2004 and 2006, I worked at a large format movie theater located in a large outdoor mall in a coastal city in South Carolina. Unlike other theaters, we only showed specialized films made specifically for a larger format, mostly nature documentaries or short films that worked well on a 10-story tall movie screen. Since there was only one screen, we had only one projector and the rejection booth, and there was only one entrance to the booth. I need to give a quick layout of the building. You entered to the front doors, and immediately to your right was a ticket counter, and behind that was our office that had the safe inside it. Straight ahead of the front doors was a large staircase that led upstairs to the theater entrance and concession stand. To the left of the front door was a set of doors that LED to a gift shop and a hallway that LED to an exit, as well as another door to the theater that only opened from inside the theater. So after the film ended, people would exit downstairs to the gift shop. There was also another exit from the theater on the opposite side. You enter the front door, purchase your ticket, walk upstairs OR, take the elevator if you're disabled, the usher takes your ticket, and you enter the theater at the entrance of your right or left. Then exit downstairs, unless of course you're disabled. There is one other stairwell that leads to the projection booth. You could access the stairwell from two doors, one on the first floor, the other on the second. And to enter the booth, you needed a key. That was the usher on duty that night. It was after the tour season was over, so there wasn't a need for many staff members. I took the last ticket, and as soon as the film started, I began cleaning and preparing for the next day. The film ends, and I make sure all the customers exit. And then I clean up all the spilled drinks and popcorn. Then I turn off the theater lights and go sit in the office behind the ticket counter. My manager on duty was finishing counting down the safe, and when he finished, we could leave. He closed the safe and was about to enter the code to set the security system, when we heard a loud thought above us. We looked at each other inside. I thought maybe something fell over in the concession stand. We made our way upstairs, and long story short, we checked everywhere. The only concession stand, all the stairwells, both hallways, the elevator, and even the projection booth. Nothing had fallen over, and no one was there that we could find. The last place we checked was the theater itself. We each entered the theater from the two entrances on the second floor. We turned on the lights and looked in the theater. We met at the bottom of the stadium-style seating, and were about to head out thinking the noise must have come from outside. That's when I happened to glance up at the projection booth. I'll never forget what I saw. Looking down at us was the outline of a person. I could not make out any features, but there was someone or something up there. I just stared for a moment, until my manager looked up as well. As soon as he saw it, he started running up the stairs to get to the projection booth. He was a lot taller and skinnier than I was, and he made it there really quickly. I managed to catch up, and there was no one there. There was one way in and one way out of the booth, and you had to have a key to get in. I live in a small town with a huge amount of woods around me. I've had a whole bunch of paranormal events happen to me, but I'm going to share the ones that happen close to an old mining tower, which reaches over 60 meters in height. One of the first things that happened around that place was me spotting a wolf, which was pretty amazing, but the next event was horrifying. I was coming up to a curve, which was the thick, dark woods on the left side with a small road that leads into it, and the tower on the right side. The right side of the road is completely open, considering it was an old mining ground with a circular track for horses being the only thing out there, so you really felt exposed when you walked past it. I was coming home from a friend's place who lived a few kilometers away. I have been walking this whole time with my headphones in, but something just kind of felt off. Something just felt unnerving, which pushed me to pause my music. That's when I heard it, a wrestling out in the woods, close to the trail that led into the woods. I stopped, locking my eyes into the woods. I saw movement, but not what caused it, and I definitely heard a voice, like a whisper, like when someone's calling out to you, but trying to be discreet. I froze, but me being the curious and horror-loving person I am, wanted to find out what it was, so I started walking in on the road that led into the woods. The road had two splits, one which led under a small bridge, up, next, to the bridge, hiding behind a bit of strawberry. A fucking man was squatting down, but it wasn't a normal man. His skin looked inverted, like someone had turned it inside out, and he was staring at me. I'm blinking. I freaked the fuck out and just ran home, expecting to see him following me. That was when I was 14. I really didn't talk about it, but more weird stuff happened around that area, mostly at night. I spend a lot of time outside, and I pass that place often with friends, and we often hear footsteps echoing inside, slamming, and usually see shadows rushing up the stairs to the broken windows. But one of the most horrifying things we saw was on the top of the tower. and it happened about 2 months ago. It's an exposed platform on the top, and we were standing. We were looking at the open fields close to the tower, talking about random things, just killing time. It was during the winter and cloudy, which gave us a nice but really still clear night. Make conversation. I noticed how my friend was just looking up, but with a weird look on his face. When I looked up at what he was staring at, I saw it. It looked like a man holding the railing, leaning over, looking down at us with a dog head. The most fucked up part was that we saw a faint reflection of its eyes. And when we started to walk off, we could fucking see how its head turned, following us with its eyes. I'm an avid hunter. I go every season, and I love it. More often than not, I don't kill any game, but I just love getting out into the woods. I don't know if you're familiar with hunting season in Pennsylvania, but during late November, rifle season is in full swing. It was already the second week of the season, and I had yet to bag any deer, so I was eager to get to it. Early in the morning, and I did. I normally get up at around 5 a.m. and drive to my hunting spot. It's private land that my grandfather owns. Him and I are the only to hunt on it, and the rest is posted to hunters. And the only others on that land are employed on my grandfather's farm. I had originally planned on calling my grandfather when I woke up and asked him if he wanted to tag along. But the weather was more than horrendous in the morning. The snow was pouring down, and the wind was really strong. I love hunting in the snow, but it almost made me decide not to go, so I knew he wouldn't want to. The roads are really bad, so it took me a bit longer to drive there. Normally, the sun would be starting to rise by now. However, it was overcast and snowing. Regardless of the snow, I walked up to my spot. It was directly behind my grandfather's house, over hill and back about 100 to 150 yards, almost immediately upon sitting in my spot. I hear things moving all around me. Honestly, I didn't pay too much attention to it. It could have been a number of things, but it was still pitch black, and the thought of it was kind of creeping me out. But there wasn't much I could do. It's not like I can shoot at anything, so I just ignored it and continued to wait. It wasn't much longer after that I began hearing something walking just over the ridge to my right. At this point, there's barely enough light to see my feet, so even if it was a deer, there was still nothing I could do. However, I could tell it wasn't a deer. I just assumed it was my grandfather walking to a spot, which is just a short walk from mine, but the lights in the house were off, and if he was up here, I'm sure he'd let me know prior. Even if it wasn't him, it was a hunter, albeit hunting illegally. I still want to let him know I was here, so I turned on my flashlight and pointed into his direction, flashing it several times. Again, even if it was a deer, I couldn't shoot it, so I felt it was better to be safe rather than sorry. Nothing happened after that. After I flashed my light, the noise stopped, which was really odd. I didn't see them turn back or hear them, so I figured they either sat down right there after seeing my light, which was considered extremely rude, or B, I didn't hear them walk off. I just assumed it was the latter. An hour or so passes, and finally the first sights of daylight start to shine through. It's still snowing, and the snow is falling in entire snowballs, rather than snowflakes, so his ability is pretty limited. I, around this time, noticed that an odd-looking lump protruding from a group of trees. The shrubs atop the hill that separates me and my granddad's house, right where I had movement earlier. It looked like a mound of dirt. However, it was sticking out from the side of a tree, so obviously it wasn't dirt. Naturally, I raised my rifle to take a closer look. I could tell immediately that I was looking at the side of an older-style camouflage coat. It took a minute, but I finally clicked. That was Sage over there. That was a person over there. I just thought it was a hunter, so I didn't know what to do about it. I knew if he was hunting on our land illegally, and from that, I could see he wasn't wearing anything orange, which is required of all hunters during the rifle season. And I could tell just from looking whoever this was wasn't my grandfather. I sat there for a minute, debating my next move, but I decided to call my granddad at the risk of blowing his stunt if that was actually him over there. So, without taking my eyes off this guy, I put on my phone and dialed his number. To my dismay, he picked up, and I told him what was going on. So he told me that he'd make his way up, but I decided on my own to give this guy a whistle to let him know I see him. But he didn't react at all. After a few minutes, I started to walk up to this guy. After walking a short distance, I could clearly see this guy, who was sound asleep tucked in between a shrub and a couple of trees. He obviously thought out here was a great place to lay down, as I would never be able to see him and his coat was not stuck out. And as I thought, he had no orange on. I gave him another whistle, much louder, and he woke right up, almost immediately shuffling over to hide his exposed coat. He had a nasty, scruffy beard and a gray hat. Honestly, he looked like a harmless whole homeless man, probably in his 50s, but he had a perfect view of my granddad's home from the spot, and I had a pretty good idea that he was planning to do once my granddad left the house. Once this guy realized he'd been caught, and he saw a 6'5" mad guy carrying a rifle, he started freaking out, his face went pale, and almost instantly, he tried to feed me some bullshit that he got lost during a drive. With a group of other hunters. A drive. As a coordinator pushed through a thicket in order to drive deer to hunters sitting at the edge of a designated driving area. However, the closest public game land is miles from the spot, so I knew it was a lie. He just wanted to keep on going on about how he was lost and how he fell asleep. He even went as far to make up a fake name on the spot. I just stood there and listened, making sure he didn't give me any fishy movements. I couldn't help but think that what this guy was going to do to my grandfather. This story is from my stepdad, who at the time lived in California from a young age into his teens. It was in the 70s when he and his family lived in Desert Center, California. My stepdad, Jake, is guessing he was about 10, old enough to play in his own and be trusted to stay close to home. Went out with friends. Where could they go, really? It was a pretty isolated out there, and there was nothing really to do anyway. So, this all loops into the story, though, I promise. So, this Saturday was like any other weekend. Jake got to have a friend over for the night, a kid named Randy. The plan was dinner, movie games, then bedtime. When dinner wasn't quite ready, 4 kids were getting antsy inside the house. Asking mom to play outside till dinner was finished cooking, they got permission, and they ran out. Into the early evening. The backyard was desolate, open and prepped with an old broken-down car, ideal for makeshift jungle gyms for 2 10-year-old boys. The next few minutes, they were just playing away, and simultaneously, they both were sharing a paused look. Before they turned their heads up to the sky, my dad just remembers, light circling above them. The ship was round in silence. He and Randy were both transfixed on it. Either of them moved, and there were still statues with no fear, just watching. What was happening in front of them? It was so odd and random that it was gone. Both Jake and Randy blinked at each other again, and then hear the rage in Jake's father's voice. "Where the hell have you been?" Jake replying. "We both been here the whole time, Dad." "The hell you have! You're both an hour late for dinner. I've been out here twice to check for you boys, and neither of you were out here. Over an hour of Randy and Jake's memory were gone. They both have zero recollection of what happened for the last hour. My dad still swears he doesn't remember a thing, other than playing outside, seeing the shape and the lights of something unidentifiable. And his father never believed that Jacob Randy never left the property. To this day, his dad still thinks both boys snuck off somewhere to get into mischief. After another year, my stepdad and his family moved away and didn't return to the same location till he was about 15. And when the family returned, my stepdad went straight to see Randy. Not a moment after the basic questions of "Hello, how are you?" did Randy ask, "Hey, you remember the sleepover at your place?" Jake replying, "Yeah, man, but I don't remember entirely everything. Just the lights." Randy said, Same here. So that's my stepdad's encounter with another kind. He remembers something without actually remember everything. Except that his father was very pissed for a while after that. He also lived in a haunted house as well, but I still have to get more details on that one. I live in the middle of Scotland. The winters are wet, cold, and immensely dark. One night, I was walking up to the shops. At about 10 p.m., the path followed an area of interlocking, run-down terraces, encroaching forest, whose branches reached out across the path of several fields, with it being winter. The grass came up to your thigh. This journey, in total, usually takes about 30 minutes at least. On the right side of the latter area of the path is a series of mansions. About 5 or 6 of them all along this stretch. Most of the occupants would have been away for the winter, but one mansion was well lit. This mansion was just like the others. A posestate building which was well kept as they usually are, apart from the specifically placed ivy. It was a completely normal mansion. All the lights in the house were turned on, and in the windows I saw the shadows of dozens of people prancing around, dancing, having fun and drinking. Strange thing was, though, I couldn't hear anything, no voices, laughter, or music, nothing at all. You know, honesty, it looked like a fun party that I somehow felt I was allowed to go in with no problem, but I don't party, we're strangers, and I carried on to the shops and got what I needed. I left the shops. It has started snowing. The clouds covered so much of the sky that not even the light of the moon shone through. The snow was barreling down so much that I could barely see, but I kept going back down the path towards home. I decided to have another look at the park of the mansion, just out of curiosity. To my surprise, all I saw was nothing. The previously lively and decadent and gorgeous mansion was now a decaying relic, its sides crumbling, its window smashed, its roof caved in. The trimmed garden was now an overgrown jungle. Between me and walking back to my house had completely changed. I quickly walked home after seeing that. A year after that, me and a friend went to have a look at the house in the middle of a summer day. We didn't break into the house, and all the doors were covered with metal locks. During one day, the house was kind of beautiful, like a little overgrown, isolated paradise, with many kinds of beautiful and colorful flowers dotting around the area. All that we found was a shed, which inside was an abandoned workshop, and a business card dated in 1996. I don't know what to think of that house. Did I imagine? It was its squatters. In Scotland, there are so many stories of fairies creating visual illusions to lure humans to their world, which could explain the lack of sound and honesty. I don't know. I still walk past that mansion whenever I go to the shops. It's been gated up now and entirely covered in locks. Whatever mystery can be answered by going into the mansion itself. I'm not going to go look. I was 13 at the time I lived in this house that was in the middle of nowhere. The only thing that was close to my house was a cemetery in Farms. It was around noon, and my parents left out of town to go get groceries. While they were gone, I was supposed to be cleaning my room, but of course I wasn't. I was on my bed playing on my iPad. The stairs in this house were very loud, and each step it'll make a creak noise. I heard the loud creak, and I immediately jumped off my bed and started cleaning. It was my mom. She came into my room, and she didn't say much, which was odd for her. She just said hi to me and mumbled mentioning that she needed something. My room had this curtain that you could go behind, and behind it was a very small hallway type thing that had 2 closets. She went behind my curtain to get something. As she was getting whatever she needed, I was by my door cleaning. A few minutes passed, and I had to ask my mom a question. I went behind my curtain to ask her, and she wasn't there. I thought that was odd because I was by the door and I would have saw her left. But I just shrugged it off, thinking I was distracted and didn't notice her walk past me. I went downstairs to see where she went and ask her my question. I checked my parents' room, and she wasn't there. I proceeded around the house, and I couldn't find her or my father anywhere. I checked outside to see if the car was there, and it wasn't. I call her phone at a confusion. She answered. I asked her where she had gone and what she needed out of my room. She was very confused, and I reminded her that she was in my room and how she needed something. In confusion. She told me that she wasn't in my room and didn't know what I was talking about, and telling me how my father had just left the grocery store and were on our way home. I explained to my mom what happened, and when she got home, she assumed I was playing around with her, so she didn't believe me or seem concerned. But she saw how serious I was. The person in my room looked just like my mother and sounded identical to her besides the mumbling, "Hey, it couldn't have been an intruder or a sibling of mine." My home had cameras in front and the back of the house, and each time something goes by and sends an alert to my father's phone. I have only one sibling, but he lives almost 2 hours away, so it wasn't him trying to act like her. I don't see why he would. So what was it? I'm currently a teenager, and I live in southeastern Ontario, more specifically, only an hour drive in Algonquin Park, which is one of the largest national parks in Canada. So you can imagine, most of the area I live in is densely wooded area, filled with wildlife and plenty of fishing and hunting locations. The incident that I'm going to be talking about took place a few years ago, and I was around the age of 10 or 11. My friend, we'll call Jackson, had invited me and another friend up, we'll call Tyler, over to his house for a birthday. It was just turning spring to summer here in Ontario. So the snow had finished melting and the weather began to warm up. Jackson lived out of town, through the back roads at a nice location where him and his family enjoyed 100 acres of land, 50 of which is theirs and 50 which belongs to his neighbor, who allows them to use their land free-willed, is beautiful, with many small lakes, dense woods, and wildlife. Tyler and I arrived at Jackson's house the night prior, to which the incident had happened. We spent the night gaming, having a bonfire, and actually passing out to a movie. The next morning, around noon, we decided we would head out into the wilderness and build some sort of fort and shoot some red squirrels with a pellet gun. Just boy stuff. After around 20 minutes of walking through the woods, we found a spot that we'd like to build in a clearing. This clearing was separated into two sides, with a creek flowing through the center. We were on the side in the direction of Jackson's house. However, his house was still a good walk away through the woods. On the other side of the clearing was a thick tree line, which we paid a little close attention to. Anyways, we began gathering ferns and branches to begin construction the fort. Tyler and Jackson both split up to gather materials, while I stayed put at the base of the fort and began building the foundation. I sat down to take a break and take a drink of water as the sun had been beaming on me and I was boiling hot. When in the corner of my eye, to my left, I spotted something. I turned my head to glance at the tree line across the creek to see what looked like a bush moving on the outskirts of the tree line. I sat there for a few seconds, trying to make out what it was, when it simply stopped moving. And I decided to get a close look and stood up and walked 20 to 25 feet forward, closer towards the creek. Jackson had just returned with some ferns and was puzzled at where I was going. He called my name and asked where I was heading off to. I signaled for him to be quiet and to come forward. He came toward me and began to take a knee beside me in the tall grass. I pointed towards the tree line and asked him if he saw the bush I was keeping my eye on. He shook his head. As he shook his head, this bush slowly began to rise upwards. Suddenly, this thing had legs. They were mossy, in a very damp. However, it stood upright like a human. It just stood there, gazing off in the opposite direction. I know now that I should have got out of there. I should have tried to get a better look at his body too, but I was kind of freaked out. Its torso looked very long and lanky, very skinny, and was covered in some mossy, damp substance as the legs were. The arms were very long and hanged all the way down to its knees. It was again covered in this mossy substance. I began scanning for the head, but had trouble locating it, and that's when I realized this thing was facing in our direction. But it didn't appear to have a head. It looked headless. I turned to ask my friend if he'd seen what I was seeing, and he didn't answer. His face turned pale white, and I turned back to see this thing moving again. Directly at us, though, my friend got up and turned around yelling Tyler's name and telling him to run. However, I kept my cool, wanted to see this thing closer. It moved awkwardly and slowly, and it appeared to have been crawling, but it was more of like a half crawl, but dragging his legs. Suddenly, a foul stench came upon me. It smelled like raw sewage, spoiled meat. The thing was still a good 80 feet away, but I decided that it was best if I get out of there. My friends were long gone already, up and over the hill on the other side of the clearing. When I'd made a good distance, I turned around for a moment to get one last glance of the thing. However, I was relieved to see that it had stopped moving again, and said idle. I went back to sprinting towards the house and managed to get there in a solid 10 minutes. When I arrived, Jackson and Tyler were waiting for me inside the house, and when I got inside, we locked the doors. Jackson's parents were not home, so we were alone. Jackson asked what happened after he left, and I explained. Tyler began sobbing in fear, and we calmed down. We put out a movie until Jackson's parents got home. We agreed not to tell anyone, as it seems kind of silly when you explain it. However, is the truth and nothing but the truth.